Good morning, brethren. Welcome to another daily study in the book of Philippians for our morning devotions. This morning we're moving on a wee bit. We're moving into chapter 2, verses 14 to 18. And as we do so, we're going to be thinking of various things that we're to remember and call to mind as we seek to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, knowing that it is God who works in us both to will and to do of his good pleasure. Probably everyone who views this daily devotional is familiar with the concept of luminous watches or luminous clocks that glow in the dark, so that in the middle of the night, when you're in complete darkness in your room, you can open your eyes and look at the clock and see what time it is. There's a story told about an Irish businessman who went to Paris on a business trip, and while he was there, he bought his wife a beautiful mother of pearl jewellery box. And he was assured by the person who sold him it that this jewellery box would shine all night in the darkness. And when he got home after dinner that night with the family all around the table, he told one of his sons to turn off all the lights in the room. With the room in complete darkness, he then brought out the little jewellery box and he gave it to his wife. And having undone all the wrapping that it had been wrapped up in for a few days while he was away on his business trip, they opened the box and there was no light. It didn't glow. Of course, the Irishman thought he'd been swindled. The box didn't glow. He'd been taken as a fool. But then he noticed some writing on the box, and it was in French, naturally. And he himself didn't understand French, so he took it to one of his employees who knew French, and she translated the writing for him. And this is what it said: "Keep me in the sun during the day, and I will shine in the darkness of the night." In other words, in order to shine in the darkness, you had to fulfill the conditions that were set down. The mother of pearl had to be in the presence of the sun, and having spent time in the presence of the sun, that mother of pearl jewellery box would glow in the dark. The Apostle Paul is going to tell his readers that they are to shine in the midst of a dark and sinful world. In order for them to do that, certain conditions must be fulfilled. What were some of the things that had to be fulfilled? Some of the things that these believers had to keep in their mind in order that they might shine in the midst of the darkness of this sinful world in which they lived. Well, first of all, they were to remember their spiritual status. In verse 15, Paul speaks of the Christians to whom he's writing as children of God. They were to remember that they enjoyed a very special relationship with God, a relationship that non-Christians did not enjoy. And as Christians, they were known to be God's children. And as God's children, certain things were expected of them insofar as how they lived their lives. Some years ago, whenever Tony Blair was Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Tony Blair's son, Ewan, was arrested for drunk and disorderly behaviour in Leicester Square in London. And it made the headlines the next day in the national newspapers. Why? Was he the first 16-year-old lad to get drunk and to be arrested by the police for drunk and disorderly behaviour? Was it the first time that this had ever happened? Of course not. Many a young lad had been arrested before for drunk and disorderly behaviour, but it didn't make the headlines. The reason that Ewan Blair's arrest made the headlines was because of whose son he was. His relationship to the Prime Minister meant that he was expected to live a certain way, and the sort of behaviour that he got up to wasn't the sort of behaviour that one would have expected of the son of a Prime Minister. For Billy Smith, who was the son of an electrician from Manchester and who got arrested maybe in Manchester for the same offence, that wouldn't make the headlines because, well, you sort of expect that of ordinary people, but you don't expect it of someone who has such a relationship with the Prime Minister. Well, folks, there's a sense in which our relationship with God is such that people expect of us a certain standard of behaviour. We are God's children. As Christians, no matter where we are, no matter who we're with, no matter what we're doing, people, knowing that we're Christians, expect us to behave in such a way, in certain ways. They expect us to speak in certain ways, not to speak in other ways. They expect us to behave ourselves with regards to moral issues and so on. It's expected of us. And so, as Paul says, that we're to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, and that we're to shine as lights in the darkness, we are to remember that we're to do this because we are children of God. It's expected of us by our Father and expected of us by those who know who our Father is. So here's a further incentive for godly living. Remember your spiritual status. You, as a Christian, are a child of God. That's something that we can rejoice in, but it's something that's also a solemn responsibility. Let us live as God's children as we go into today. Every blessing.